So basically, we're going to continue looking at the whole concept of inflation and the challenges that we're going to face in the macroeconomy when prices actually increase. The next slide, slide 42, basically says that inflation as we know it obscures a relative price change. And it says here that relative prices describe the exchange rate between goods, how much one good costs compared to another. And it says here that inflation does not necessarily cause the change in relative prices, but it can obscure them. And it occurs because of the greater uncertainty about the price of one good relative to another. In some jurisdictions, what you actually find is that the inflation rate may actually differ across cities, across towns, etc. This is not applicable to the US, but again, to the extent that we're dealing with this is not applicable to us here in Antigua and Barbuda, but to the extent that we're dealing with a textbook that's written from a US perspective, I just thought it's fitting for us to note that even though we may have one inflation rate in a particular state, it may differ across different counties, etc. within the US. Let us now look at inflation and interest rates. And this one is saying to you is that interest is the dollar amount paid by borrowers to lenders because lenders must be rewarded for foregoing present consumption. When you go to the bank to make a loan, to take out a loan, you have to pay an interest. So he says here that the interest rate is the interest per year as a percentage of the amount loaned or deposited. Okay, so on your savings account at the bank, they're mandated to give you 2%. On a loan, they might ask you to pay back 8%, whatever the case may be. So with that, we have what's called your interest, which is the dollar amount paid by borrowers to lenders because lenders must be compensated for foregoing present consumption. And again, the interest rate is the amount that is actually paid back on the loan or the deposit within the bank. What then is the whole term of nominal interest rate? So the nominal interest rate, it measures interest in terms of the current dollar value paid. So the interest rate that a bank charges or the interest rates that the bank pays you on your deposit is a nominal rate. It's not a real rate because inflation is unknown. It's only in the future after the economy would have already passed some time period and then you actually do a measurement, then you get the actual value for the inflation rate. So he says here that nominal interest rate is the interest rate that appears on the borrowing agreement or deposit certificate. It is the rate quoted in the news media. You don't know the actual rate until after, or the real rate until after the inflation rate would have been calculated. So the real interest rate then is equal to your nominal rate. So I've already told you that the nominal rate minus the inflation rate, and that basically is giving you an idea as to how much constant purchasing power your dollar basically has. So, to the extent then that we have an equation R is equal to N minus I, if an economy is not experiencing any inflation, then the nominal rate of interest and the inflation and the nominal rate of interest and the real rate would have been equal. R is equal to N minus I. If I is 0, R is equal to N. That's what this bullet is basically saying to you in a nutshell. It says here that with inflation, the nominal interest rate can either exceed the real interest rate. Okay? If the interest rate is high enough, the real interest rate can be negative. If N minus I is high enough, then R can be negative. 6 being the nominal minus 8 being the inflation rate will give you a real of -2. That's what the first bullet is saying. The nominal interest rate will not even offset the loss in spending power because of inflation. Lenders will lose purchasing power. So if a bank gives you a loan, and let's say the loan is for 6%, so the 6% being the nominal rate, and inflation actually turns out to be 8%. It means then that the bank real rate of return is -2%. So you're basically paying back the bank money that would have lost purchasing power in it at 2% in real terms. That's what he's saying to you. So is that why lenders and borrowers are concerned more about the real interest rate than the nominal interest rate? Lenders are more concerned about the real interest rate because the fact that inflation could actually wipe out the nominal rate of interest that they're charging. If a bank wants to have positive purchasing power in the long term, it has to then give you a loan that incorporates an inflation rate that is lower than the nominal rate, so that at the end of the day you end up with a positive real rate. So the next one says to you is that the higher the expected rate of inflation, the higher the nominal rate that lenders requires and that borrowers are willing to pay. So that's what I've just basically explained to you. If you want to ensure you have a positive rate of return and the expectation is that inflation is going to be high, the nominal has to be high also to offset that high rate of inflation. So the next one says to you that the expected real interest rate equals the nominal rate of interest minus the expected inflation rate. So it's just basically rehashing what we have just said. So the next bullet is going on to explain to you how is the equilibrium market determined in terms of the interest rate. You have the demand for funds. Persons like you and I demand the supply, and he says here now that the greater the interest rate, the greater the reward for lending money. So banks traditionally are prepared to lend more the higher interest rates because that's the way they're going to make their money. The supply curve actually slopes upwards. So the higher the interest rate, the higher the cost for borrowing money, the quantity of money demanded decrease as the interest rates actually decrease. Or so that the persons are prepared to borrow money more, the lower the interest rate. So that's why sometimes you find banks tend to offer these incentives whereby they reduce the interest rates to try and stimulate borrowing. So the equilibrium then in the market exists where the demand and the supply curves basically intersect. Why is inflation unpopular? Inflation is unpopular because it hit those whose incomes are fixed in nominal terms. So again, if your income is fixed in nominal terms and prices are increasing, then in real terms, your purchasing power is decreasing. Okay, so if that's the case, inflation is unanticipated, you're not getting any increases in your salary, your real salary in terms of your purchasing power is decreasing. It arbitrarily redistributes income and wealth from one group to another. Okay, we have already explained that. Whereby if it is more than you anticipate demand, you may then have your winners and losers come into play. It reduces the ability to make long-term plans. If prices are increasing and you don't expect it, it's going to be difficult for you to plan in the future. It forces buyers and sellers to pay more attention to price increases and less to what's happening in terms of real economic activity. So in a nutshell, what we're saying to you is that inflation, there has to be some concerns regarding inflation within the macroeconomy because inflation reduces the purchasing power of money. We have to know what's happening in terms of the different types of inflation. What are the various means through which inflation can manifest itself? And that is through cost push and inflation and demand pull, we have to be concerned about inflation, because if it is unanticipated, it forces things like buyers and sellers to pay more attention to prices and less time for production. By virtue of that, because you're concerned more about prices, you're watching prices, the overall productive capacity of the economy basically declines. So that's it in a nutshell as to what we wish to discuss in terms of unemployment and inflation. Thank you.